The sun was slowly rising above the wide, open land, painting the sky with a soft orange light. The warm air carried the smell of dry earth, and far away horses could be heard neighing. It was early morning on a quiet ranch in the southwest. The fields stretched as far as the eye could see, and the world felt still except for the sound of the wind passing through the dry grass. A wagon moved slowly toward the ranch. On it sat a young Apache girl named Nita. Her hands rested in her lap, her dark eyes fixed on the dusty road. She was quiet, not because she had nothing to say, but because silence had become her shield. She had learned that words could sometimes make things worse, so she kept them locked inside. Nita was small and slim, with long black hair tied loosely behind her back. She wore a faded dress that had clearly been worn many times before. She didn't look up as the wagon reached the front of the ranch house. Her head stayed bowed, not because she was weak, but because she had learned that when she lowered her head, people noticed her less. And sometimes being unseen was the safest place to be. The ranch was owned by a man named Samuel Turner. He was in his 40s, tall, with a serious face and eyes that seemed to notice everything. Life on the ranch was hard. Every day started before sunrise and ended after sunset. The workers respected Samuel. He was strict but fair. He didn't smile much, but he also didn't like unnecessary cruelty. When Samuel stepped out onto the porch that morning, he saw the wagon. His boots made a soft sound on the wooden steps as he walked closer. He wasn't expecting anyone new. The ranch was already full of hands working the cattle, fixing fences and tending to the land. But he saw the young girl sitting still on the wagon and frowned slightly. The man driving the wagon explained that the girl would be working on the ranch now. Samuel didn't say anything right away. He simply studied her. She looked so young, maybe around 13 or 14. Too young to work the fields, he thought. She kept her head down the whole time like a shadow afraid of light. "Where's she from?" Samuel asked finally. "Apache," the driver answered. Samuel's expression didn't change, but inside, something tightened. He knew how things were for the Apache people at that time. Many had lost their homes, and their children were sent away to work on farms and ranches. Most ranch owners treated them like they didn't matter. Samuel didn't agree with everything he saw in the world, but he didn't argue either. He just did what he had to do to keep the ranch running. The driver climbed down, handed over a small piece of paper with the arrangement written on it, then left. Samuel stood there for a moment, looking at Nita. The morning light made her look even smaller. She still hadn't lifted her head. "Come on," he said finally, his voice calm but firm. Nita slowly stepped down from the wagon. She followed Samuel as he led her toward the barn. Her bare feet made small prints in the dust. She didn't ask where she was going, didn't speak at all. Her world was quiet, like a deep well with no echo. The barn was cool inside, shaded from the hot sun. Horses shifted in their stalls, their ears twitching as she passed. A few workers were already moving hay and preparing for the day. They stopped and stared for a moment when they saw her. She felt their eyes like sharp points on her skin, but she didn't look back. Samuel pointed to a small corner near the back of the barn. "You'll stay here for now," he said simply. Nita nodded. She didn't ask for more. She never did. The corner was small but clean. She sat down on the ground, folding her knees to her chest, listening to the soft sounds of the horses breathing. It was not home, but she had no choice. The days on the ranch followed a rhythm. The sun came up, work began, the air filled with the sounds of animals, tools, and footsteps. Nita learned quickly to do the chores she was given. She carried buckets of water, brushed the horses, and cleaned the barn. She did everything quietly. No complaints, no questions. The other workers didn't speak to her much. Some ignored her completely. Some whispered things she didn't understand. But she never let their words touch her heart. She built a wall inside herself, one made of silence and patience. Samuel would see her sometimes when he passed through the barn. At first, she was just another worker to him. He didn't talk to her, and she didn't talk to him. But something about the way she moved caught his attention. She never wasted time. She worked carefully, like someone who had learned to survive by doing everything right the first time. One afternoon, Samuel walked into the barn after checking the cattle. The sun was setting and golden light spilled across the wooden floor. He saw Nita sitting quietly next to a young foal that had hurt its leg. She had a small cloth in her hand, gently cleaning the animal's wound with the care of someone who understood pain. The foal wasn't afraid of her. It leaned its head against her arm like it trusted her completely. Samuel didn't say anything. He just stood there for a while watching. Something in that small scene stayed with him long after he walked away. As days turned into weeks, Samuel noticed other small things. She shared her bread with the ranch dog who followed her everywhere. She picked up tools that others left behind without being asked. She helped an older worker fix a broken bucket, even though no one had told her to. Nita's head remained lowered most of the time. It was as if she had learned to live behind an invisible curtain, but her quiet actions spoke louder than words. At night, when the ranch finally grew silent, Nita would sit alone in her corner of the barn. The stars outside looked bright and close, like they were listening. She would wrap her thin blanket around herself and close her eyes. Memories of her tribe, the sound of songs sung under the night sky, came back to her. They were soft now, like fading echoes, but they were hers. She missed the sound of laughter, the warmth of a fire, and the smell of the pine trees near her old home. She missed the faces she loved. But she didn't cry. She had promised herself not to. Samuel began to sense a quiet strength in her. It was not loud, not the kind of strength that made speeches or fought battles. It was the kind of strength that survived in silence. The ranch hands didn't always understand it. Some thought she was strange, but Samuel saw something else, a spark. Small but steady. Early one morning, before the sun was fully up, Samuel found her outside carrying buckets of water that were clearly too heavy for someone her size. But she kept walking, step after slow step, her face calm and focused. She never asked for help. She didn't need praise. She just did what had to be done. Samuel offered to take the buckets, but she shook her head softly and continued walking. For the first time in a long while, Samuel felt something stir inside him. Respect. He didn't fully understand it yet, but the image of the girl, small but strong, stayed with him all day. Nita, on the other hand, still kept her eyes lowered whenever he came near. She wasn't used to kindness. She wasn't used to trust. Her world had taught her to expect little and hope for nothing. But something about the way Samuel watched her was different from the others. He didn't look at her like she was invisible, and he didn't look at her like she was a problem. His gaze was quiet, thoughtful, almost careful. The days grew warmer as the season changed. The land turned gold under the sun. Life on the ranch went on as usual, fixing fences, herding cattle, mending tools. But in the quiet spaces between work, a slow, unspoken change was happening. Nita didn't see it yet. She only knew how to survive the day. But Samuel was beginning to see her as more than just another worker. He saw a story written in silence, a life carrying weight far beyond her years. He didn't know what he would do about it. Not yet. But every time he saw her, something inside him reminded him that sometimes strength doesn't shout. Sometimes it bows its head and keeps walking forward. The days passed, and the soft warmth of spring turned into the golden heat of summer. Life on the ranch never slowed down. The horses still needed care, the fences needed mending, and the land demanded attention every single day. But something quiet had begun to shift between Nita and Samuel. It wasn't loud or fast. It was like the slow change of the sky at sunset, soft, steady, and almost invisible if you weren't paying attention. Nita continued to rise before the sun, just as she always had. She worked without being told, moving through the barn like someone who had belonged there for years. She had learned the sound of each horse's breath, the way the wind moved through the tall grass, the creak of the wooden doors when the day began. Samuel watched her more often now, though never in a way that made her uncomfortable. It wasn't pity. It wasn't judgment. It was quiet respect. He had spent many years working the land, surrounded by strong men who shouted orders and bragged about their strength. But this girl, small and silent, carried something even stronger. She carried a heart that didn't give up. One evening, the sky turned dark earlier than usual. Heavy clouds gathered above the ranch, and the air felt different, still and heavy as if it was waiting. The workers hurried to cover the hay and lead the horses inside. A storm was coming. Samuel walked through the barn, making sure everything was safe. The wind began to blow hard and rain started falling, soft at first, then harder. He was about to head back to the house when he noticed something. Nita wasn't there. He turned back toward the open yard, and through the sheets of rain, he saw her small figure moving slowly near the fence. She was trying to guide one of the young foals back into the barn. The little horse was scared, its ears twitching, refusing to move. Nita was soaked from head to toe, but she didn't give up. She moved calmly, whispering softly to the animal, her hands steady. Samuel ran toward them, but she didn't see him at first. She kept speaking to the foal, her soft voice almost lost in the sound of the storm. Finally, the little horse took a step toward her. She smiled, a small, warm smile that no one else saw. She reached out and gently led it inside. When Samuel caught up, she was standing in the barn again, rainwater dripping from her hair, her dress clinging to her arms. Her hands trembled a little from the cold, but her eyes were calm. "You should have stayed inside," Samuel said. His voice wasn't harsh. It was full of something else, something quieter. She lowered her head as she always did, not sure how to answer. Samuel looked at her for a long moment. Then, without a word, he walked to the wall, unlatched a soft wool blanket, and placed it gently around her shoulders. Her eyes widened slightly. She wasn't used to kindness. She waited for more words, but Samuel didn't say anything else. He just gave her a small nod and walked away to check on the rest of the barn. That night, when the rain finally stopped and the wind grew quiet again, something had changed inside her. She sat in her corner, wrapped in that same blanket, and for the first time in a long while, she felt something warm in her chest that she couldn't name. In the following days, Samuel's quiet actions continued. He didn't treat her like she was invisible anymore. He gave her small responsibilities, not as a command, but as trust. She was allowed to feed the horses on her own, help with the equipment, even check the fields. Little by little, Nita's world grew wider than that small corner in the barn. The workers noticed too. At first, some of them didn't understand why Samuel treated her differently, but as time passed, they began to see it too. She was careful, respectful, and honest. She worked harder than anyone else, never asking for more than what was given. Slowly, their looks changed. The sharp stares turned into simple nods. A few even greeted her in the mornings. Nita didn't say much, but she didn't bow her head as deeply anymore. She was still quiet, but something inside her was beginning to lift, like a flower slowly turning toward the sun. One morning, Samuel asked her to help him near the north field. A fence had broken and the cattle had wandered close to the creek. It wasn't an easy job, but he didn't treat her like she couldn't do it. He handed her a tool, showed her once, then let her work beside him. As they worked together, something unspoken grew between them. It wasn't loud or forced. It was the simple trust between two people who understood hard work and silence. Samuel began to talk a little more, not about her past, but about the ranch, the land, the animals. Nita listened carefully, absorbing every word. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a shadow. She felt like someone who belonged, even just a little. One evening, the sun was setting behind the hills, painting the sky in gold and soft pink. The ranch was quiet except for the sound of horses settling for the night. Samuel walked into the barn and saw Nita sitting on a small wooden box near the doorway. She wasn't hiding in the corner anymore. She was looking outside, her head lifted, her eyes on the glowing sky. He didn't speak at first. He just stood near the doorway watching her. She noticed him after a while and quickly lowered her gaze out of habit. But Samuel gently said, "You don't have to bow your head anymore." She looked at him, unsure what to say. He didn't mean it as an order. He meant it as a quiet truth. "You've got nothing to be ashamed of here," he added softly. "You work hard. You have a good heart. That matters." No one had ever said words like that to her before. She didn't know how to answer. But slowly, almost shyly, she lifted her head again. Her dark eyes met his. It was a moment without big gestures or loud words, but it felt like the world had shifted. In that simple moment, Samuel wasn't a ranch owner, and she wasn't just a worker. They were two people who had both carried their own quiet pain, standing under the same fading light. As the weeks went on, life on the ranch continued. There were still long days and hard work. But Nita wasn't the same girl who had first arrived on the wagon. Her steps were steadier now. Her shoulders were straighter. She spoke a few words here and there, not many, but enough to be heard. Samuel noticed every change. He didn't push her. He just made space for her to grow. One afternoon, one of the ranch workers hurt his arm while working with the cattle. Nita stepped forward before anyone else could move. She didn't panic. She fetched water, wrapped his arm carefully, and made sure he was all right. Everyone saw it. It was a quiet reminder that strength didn't always look loud. Later that evening, Samuel found her in the barn again. She was brushing one of the older horses, her face calm. "You've done well," he said simply. She turned, surprised, but he was serious. "You belong here," he added. "Not because you have to. Because you've earned it." The words settled into her heart like sunlight after a long winter. She thought back to the day she had arrived, head down, heart wrapped in silence. She remembered the cold nights, the endless work, the way she had tried to become invisible. But now, when she stood in the barn, the horses seemed to know her, the workers nodded to her, and Samuel treated her as part of the place, not outside of it. For the first time, the ranch didn't feel like a cage. It felt like open sky. One night, when the stars shone brightly above the fields, she lay on the soft hay in her corner. But this time it didn't feel small. The air smelled like warm earth and grass. She smiled quietly to herself. She was still silent, but her silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of strength, memory, and a quiet kind of hope. Samuel sat on the porch not far away, sipping warm coffee, watching the stars too. He didn't say it out loud, but he felt something had changed for both of them. She had lifted her head, and in doing so, she had lifted something inside him too.